Time for another episode of Council Bluffs Today, presented by Waldstein Plumbing. Hi, I am Todd Studer. This week, we're spending a little time exploring the history of Council Bluffs. And yesterday, we talked about how Carter Lake came to be. And today, well, it's going to sound like we're talking fashion. You know, like when you hear the word bloomers, you think of baggy, old-fashioned underwear, but the woman behind that name who spent the last 40 years of her life right here in Council Bluffs, piece by piece, changed American history. And ironically, she ended up hating that her name was attached to a pair of pants. Her name was Amelia Bloomer, and she was a brilliant writer, a groundbreaking journalist, and a master organizer who was a lot more than just a passing fashion trend. Today, we're going to look at the real history of Amelia Bloomer, keeping strictly to the facts here without the myth and hopefully without the gossip. Amelia was born in upstate New York back in 1818. Her family didn't really have much money, so she only received a few years of basic primary schooling, but she did love to read, and she loved to write. By the time she was 17, she was already earning her own living, working as a school teacher and a live-in governess. This early independence allowed her to see firsthand how few options women had back then to make a living and manage their own money or even get an education. Everything shifted for her in 1840 when she met Dexter Bloomer. He was a young law student and a newspaper editor. They fell in love, got married, but their wedding was not typical for the 19th century. Dexter viewed Amelia as his complete intellectual equal. And in fact, in historical records, he explicitly refused to let the traditional word obey be included in their formal marriage vows. The newlyweds moved to Seneca Falls, New York. Dexter owned a local newspaper, encouraged Amelia to write for it, but public life was incredibly strict back then, and society really didn't think it was proper for a woman to write about politics or social reform under her own name. So because of that stigma, Amelia used various pen names, like Gloriana and Violet, to publish her early articles about community issues and the temperance movement, which was the national battle against alcoholism. So in July of 1848, the famous Seneca Falls Convention took place. This was the first formal women's rights convention in American history, and Amelia was there. She was just there as an observer, but she actually did not sign the famous Declaration of Sentiments. At that exact moment in her life, she believed that fighting alcoholism was more urgent than getting women the right to vote. She argued that because frontier and working-class women suffered directly from domestic abuse and financial ruin caused by drunk husbands, banning alcohol was the most immediate way to keep women safe. So to spread their message, Amelia and the local temperance ladies decided to start their own publication. And on January 1st, 1849, Amelia officially launched a newspaper called The Lily, publishing a bi-weekly newspaper. This was grueling physical work, and within a few weeks, the other women on the committee quit because the financial stress and the long hours at the printing press, but Amelia refused to let it die, and she took over the entire operation by herself. By doing that, she became the first woman in American history to solely own, operate, and edit a newspaper specifically for women. Shortly after that, her husband Dexter was appointed as the local postmaster, and he made Amelia his assistant postmaster. She set up an editorial desk right inside the post office. This was a massive operational advantage because she could see exactly what political pamphlets and papers were moving through town, and she had direct access to national mailing routes. Under her solo leadership, the Lily exploded, and she started printing radical essays about the lack of legal rights for women. The famous activist Elizabeth Cady Stanton began writing regular, uncensored columns for the paper under the pen name Sunflower. Soon, the circulation grew from a few hundred local copies to over 4,000 issues that were shipped all across the country. History books always talk about the legendary partnership between Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, but that partnership would never have happened without Amelia Bloomer. In May of 1851, Susan B. Anthony came to Seneca Falls for an anti-slavery lecture, stayed as a guest at Amelia's house. After the lecture, Amelia and Susan were walking down a public street corner. They bump into Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Amelia stepped up and introduced them. Stanton later wrote about that exact moment on the street corner. She said she liked Susan from the very first glance, but had no idea how tightly woven their lives would become. That single introduction by Amelia Bloomer created the organizational engine of the entire American women's suffrage movement. Service Master Restore by Schmader knows it can be hard to get things back to normal when you've suffered serious property damage due to flooding, fire, or smoke, and that can oftentimes lead to mold, and you may be left with all sorts of questions about how to get your home or business back to normal. It's easy. You give Cindy Schmader a call with Service Master Restore by Schmader. Her phone number, 402-339-9911. Looking for a place to relax, recharge, and take better care of yourself? Kinetics Massage and Bodywork has moved into the Omni Center in Council Bluffs. Owner and licensed massage therapist Tina Hebner offers customized massage and bodywork designed around what your body needs, from relaxation massage to focused therapeutic work. And with the move into the Omni Center, Tina is building towards something even bigger, a larger wellness space for the Council Bluffs community. Take time for yourself. Schedule with Kinetics Massage and Bodywork at kineticsbodywork.com. So, let's talk about the clothing. This is what made her famous, but it also became her biggest frustration. To be clear, Amelia Bloomer did not invent the garment that bears her name. It was actually designed by a woman named Elizabeth Smith Miller, who wanted something practical to wear while working in her garden. In the 1850s, proper society required women to wear tightly laced corsets and heavy petticoats under floor-length dresses, the whole outfit easily weighing 15 pounds. The long skirts, they drug through the muddy, dirty streets, picking up a lot of waste and just nastiness. And women then tracked all of that into their homes. The tight corsets compressed their ribs, made it hard to breathe and digest food, or even just move freely. So Miller's alternative outfit was revolutionary. It was loose. It was a short tunic dress that came down just below the knees, worn over loose trousers that gathered at the ankles. Elizabeth Cady Stanton loved it, and she showed it to Amelia. And Amelia saw the outfit as a massive victory for women's health and physical freedom. She began wearing it exclusively and published the patterns and descriptions in the Lily. Because her paper distributed the pattern to thousands of homes, mainstream newspapers started calling it the Bloomer costume, which people eventually just shortened to Bloomers. The backlash was instant and severe. Preachers, they gave sermons claiming the outfit was a sin against God. Mobs, they threw stones at Amelia when she was walking down the street. Newspapers printed cruel cartoons showing Bloomer women acting like men and abandoning their families. By 1854, the obsession with the pants became a major problem for the movement. So Amelia, Stanton, and Anthony realized that whenever they walked onto a stage to give a serious speech about legal rights or education, the reporters, they just ignored the words, and they only wrote about the cut and color of their pants. The fashion choice was completely drowning out their political message. So after 3 years of constant harassment, Amelia made the practical choice to stop wearing it. She went back to long dresses. For the rest of her life, she was deeply frustrated that decades of hard work as a journalist and postmaster were overshadowed by a brief controversy over a pair of pants. In 1853, the Bloomer family moved to Ohio because Dexter bought a share in another newspaper, the Western Home Visitor. Amelia kept running the Lily from her new home, and she used her position to put her values into action. She hired a young woman to work as a professional typesetter in the print shop. The male employees went on strike, demanding that the woman be fired, or at least paid less. Amelia and Dexter, they stood their ground and gave the men an ultimatum. You either work with her or you get out. The men left, and Amelia hired an all-female staff of replacement typesetters, paid them all a fair living wage. And by the end of 1854, the physical toll of editing 2 papers and traveling for public speaking loops, it caused Amelia's health to decline. She made the tough decision to sell the Lily to another suffragist named Mary Birdsall in Indiana so she could prepare for her next big move. In the spring of 1855, Amelia and Dexter moved to a frontier outpost that we all know as home, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Back then, Council Bluffs was a wild, booming border town, and it was filled with pioneers and gold prospectors, traders that were getting ready to cross the Missouri. They built a permanent home on West Broadway. Dexter started a successful law practice, getting involved in local politics, and eventually elected as the first superintendent of public schools for Council Bluffs. But for Amelia, the environment was completely different from New York. This was a rough frontier town. Basic survival and land deals came first. There were no women's rights groups or progressive lecture events. But instead of giving up, Amelia changed her strategy to fit the frontier. She knew that in a new territory, economic survival was the most critical issue. She traveled around southwest Iowa and across the river into Omaha, urging pioneer women to get the legal titles to their own land and homes. She said that under the laws of the time, if a husband died or left, a woman with no property rights would be left completely broke. In 1856, Amelia stepped onto a stage inside a local hall and delivered the first public lecture on women's rights ever recorded in the history of Council Bluffs. Local archives noted that her calm, clear, and logical voice completely surprised the crowd of frontier workers who had expected a wild caricature. She was the only woman in the entire state of Iowa traveling and lecturing on the subject before the Civil War. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, all that national suffrage work paused. Amelia immediately stepped up to lead the Soldiers' Aid Society of Council Bluffs. She worked out of her home and local churches and organized a massive network of volunteers who made uniforms, packed medical supplies, and raised money for the Iowa soldiers fighting on the battlefields. She also focused on the young, single women who moved west to work as school teachers. These women were paid a tiny fraction of what male teachers made for the exact same work, and Amelia used her husband's position as school superintendent to pressure the school board for fair pay. She even housed several of the young teachers in her own home on West Broadway, and that saved them from high frontier rents. S&B Country Kennel is the top spot in southwest Iowa when you need to know your dog will receive only the best. Boarding, daycare, grooming, self-washing, training, and even a membership available to a dog park over an acre in size. S&B Country Kennel also has rescue dogs, so check with them about adoption possibilities. sbcountrykennel.com, that's country spelled with a K, located just west of I-29 on Bungie Avenue, south of Council Bluffs. If you have a leak, a clogged drain, or even if you're planning a big remodel, Waldstein Plumbing in Council Bluffs has you covered. With fast, reliable service and expert craftsmanship, handling everything from small repairs to major installations. They're locally owned and trusted and take pride in doing the job right the first time. Residential or commercial, big or small, when plumbing problems strike, they're the ones to call. Visit waldsteinplumbing.com. After the war, the fight for the vote started up again. In 1870, Amelia co-founded the Iowa Women Suffrage Association in Des Moines and served as its state president. She focused on a direct goal of changing the Iowa state constitution to remove the word male from the voting laws. She also heavily supported a new legal code that finally ended the distinction between male and female property rights in the state. Amelia was a practical leader who did not use loud protest tactics. Instead, she spent weeks in the state capitol directly lobbying lawmakers, and her strategy worked, and the legislature did pass a bill to grant women the vote. However, Iowa law required an amendment to pass 2 consecutive legislative sessions before the public could vote on it. And by the next session, the Midwest liquor industry, they stepped in, spent an awful lot of money, and they were scared that women voters would immediately ban alcohol, and they successfully lobbied, and the bill was narrowly defeated. By the 1880s, decades of rough travel and public speaking took a permanent toll on Amelia's health. Chronic illness kept her bound to her home here in Council Bluffs. She stepped down as president of the state association, but never did stop writing. When Susan B. Anthony and the famous abolitionist Frederick Douglass came to Council Bluffs to visit, they stayed as guests directly in the Bloomer home. In 1887, Anthony and Stanton formally asked Amelia to write the definitive history of early Iowa suffrage activity for their National Historical volumes. And even from her home, she spent her final years answering letters from younger activists across the country and writing historical columns for the Nonpareil. In 1889, a major publishing house in New York wrote to Amelia and asked if she felt any bitterness or regret that after 50 years of intense labor, women still had not won the right to vote. Amelia wrote back with absolute clarity and said, "I have no regrets. The change in public sentiment since I first began my work in 1849 is immense. Then, a woman who spoke in public was viewed as a monstrosity, but today, our ideas are discussed in every home. We've laid the foundations. Others will step into the building." It was one of her final interviews with the nonpareil where she compared herself to the biblical figure of Joshua. She knew she wouldn't live long enough to cross the river and see the final goal, but she took comfort in knowing that future generations of women would walk into that freedom and enjoy it. Amelia Bloomer died in her Council Bluffs home on December 30th, 1894, at the age of 76. And her husband, Dexter, he was devastated, and he gathered her letters and articles and speeches and published her official biography the next year. And that ensured her exact words were preserved for history without distortion. Amelia was buried in Fairview Cemetery up on the northern bluffs here in Council Bluffs. And our tombstone, they carved the inscription, "A Pioneer in Women's Enfranchisement." She passed away exactly 26 years before the 19th Amendment was finally ratified in 1920 that gave American women the constitutional right to vote. Today, her name is still a permanent part of our local community at Bloomer Elementary School. So the next time you see her name, remember that she wasn't just a trend or a piece of clothing. She was a journalist and an organizer and a true pioneer who helped build the foundation of American freedom. Thank you so much. I love history, and I love to be able to talk about some of the truly national history that we have here in Council Bluffs. And we're going to keep bringing you programs like this. If you like what you see, please click like, follow, share, even subscribe if on the platform it gives you that opportunity. And you can help more people see what's going on here in our little corner of the world. This is Council Bluffs Today, presented by Waldstein Plumbing. I am Todd Studer. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.